So my next panellist here is John Dalby. He has a huge amount of experience in the maritime space. And John, the floor is yours.
Thank you, David. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm glad you managed to stay the course after that wonderful lunch. Just want to say thank you to David. David and I have been working together, associating almost since the beginning, and I'm very proud and privileged to have been invited to give you a brief account of my involvement in the topic. The first thing I want to do, though, is off topic, and that's to scotch a rumour that my friend and colleague Conrad Thorpe, and between the two of us we share up much of Africa. I'm stationed in Sierra Leone and I'm responsible also for South Africa. There's no truth in the rumour that we only have one suit between us, which is why we both wore our suits today. Right. I borrowed mine from my brother. Okay, human rights at sea. Let me give you a brief background to me to justify my appearance here before you. This isn't by way of bigging myself up. It's just so that you understand that I understand what's going on. My company was started in 1986. I started it from being a cadet in 1964. And don't anybody do the maths, please. I elevated to master on VLCCs and left the sea in 86 for marine risk management. We were engaged in cargo loss control, asset recovery, which I'll mention in a little bit more detail later, and counter-piracy since 1995. I believe one of the first commercial counter-piracy organisations. And recently we launched our global airborne reconnaissance and surveillance, which is particularly relevant to the Mediterranean migrant crisis at the moment. So 52 years of service to the maritime community for various reasons, most of which will be obvious, having constant exposure to the welfare issues and seafarers' practices, including things like we go and help other seafarers in distress, which Norman mentioned when he was talking about CSM. Now, migrants have been occurring and crossing the Mediterranean for many years, but I've called it a benign way. It's sort of almost, it wasn't a commercial business practice like it's become now, and it wasn't preceded or accompanied by conflict as it is now. There have been thousands of deaths by drowning. You don't need me to tell you that. And the emphasis now is on land routes coming up to Libya or culminating in Libya, coming across and up from the south, and we're getting the inevitable drownings on those trying to reach Malta and Sicily and Italy generally. I'm sort of steering slightly away from the eastern end of the Med because I haven't got direct experience of that. Now the stakeholders, as I see it at the moment, are the Coast Guard, the naval assets from the various countries, the NGOs, one of whom we've heard from, MOAS, who are doing a spectacular job there, various charities, and in that, I suppose the most obvious one is MSF, merchant shipping community itself, and certain private initiatives that are going on in the background that rarely reach the press. So what are the stakeholders doing? Well, let's try and analyse what they're doing and the effectiveness of it. Let's take a look at the Coast Guard. Now, everybody's doing a great job, don't get me wrong. But there are limited search and rescue resources and capabilities afforded to the various Coast Guards, notably or mostly the Italian. We've got naval assets out there. We've got our own UK Royal Navy assets there. And that's driven by political consideration, should we say. The cost of that must be immense. I don't put a figure on how much one naval vessel out there is costing per week, but it's a hell of a lot. Or I could put it, but I'm not allowed to. The NGOs and charities, almost by definition, are experiencing limitations for funding, and that's their sort of drawback. They need more money, and if anybody wants to pop a few coins in a MOAS envelope, I'd encourage them to do so. Merchant shipping. This is a tricky one because, as I alluded to earlier on, all of us seafarers have this feel it incumbent upon us, or it's part of our makeup to always go to the help of other seafarers. And we do that. But the problem is there are various drawbacks, that responsibilities, liabilities, potential liabilities, and it's resulted in a number of instances, and I don't know how, I know of at least 11 in the Med, where owners have actually instructed their masters to turn a blind eye. If they see something, they just go, oh, hard a starboard, helmsman, and away, get the hell out of it, so as not to get involved. The private initiatives, the problem with private initiatives is that they need money as well as the NGOs and the charities. The one that I'm particularly involved in, which this isn't a plug, is it? No. Is Global Alert, which is an airborne reconnaissance and surveillance program, where, for example, we go up to 10,000 feet, we can cover 125,000 square miles of ocean instantaneously, and at 10,000 feet we can spot, locate and identify a Coke can from 10 miles. So that is the kind of asset that's available. The problem is that it's getting a little better, but there's rather disparate coordination between the various people involved. And there's very limited capability, as I've referred to, especially on the part of the Coast Guard for search and rescue missions. And there are virtually no MPA, by the way, is Maritime Patrol Aircraft, no MPA resources available, which is another problem that this country faces and this country's border force faces. So, a few weeks ago, when I wrote this, maritime migration was thought to be stabilising and reducing. Well, as we've heard today, that's not the case. The recent airstrikes have shifted the goalposts, and now there's an upsurge of migrant movements out of Libya with significant deaths, again, as we know. There's a reluctance on the part of European governments, even on the part of Chancellor Merkel now, to shelter and accept migrants. This is becoming a big problem. This penultimate bullet point, embedded fundamentalists, about 2 years ago, January 2014, I issued a warning, sort of collective maritime warning. What are we doing to weed out any fundamentalists that might be in the crew? There was a question asked earlier about potential pirates being amongst the migrants. Well, that isn't the danger, as Norman said. The danger is that one or two of those migrants might be a fundamentalist, and you're never going to find out because, by definition, they probably don't have any form of ID, documentation. They can be who they say they are. So, what's the conclusion? Well, increasing numbers are planning to return to their original, they're planning to return to their original states. But of course, that depends upon stabilising the situation in their own home country. Again, the reluctance of so-called Western governments to accept the migrants. And there's starting to be a reduction in the level of interest and in the funding, incidentally. So, in the context of this, what else is going on? Well, defaulting ship owners are on the increase. This has been referred to. Our asset recovery service, when we first put it into play in 1989, we recovered and repossessed 149 ships. Now that cycle is starting to repeat itself. And as has been referred to by other speakers, the conditions on board the ship and for the crews are horrendous. far worse than our colleague from St Kitts described. I think he was taking it easy on you. So what help's available? Well, there's asset recovery specialists, bank and lawyer intervention, the unions, ITF and Nautilus predominantly, the missions to seafarers and apostleship of the sea, and anybody, you, who are involved in the maritime world at all. So, just by attending this conference, you've demonstrated your support for this fight against international maritime human rights, and I commend it to you. Thank you. Is that okay?